Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Jenny Ravel and I'm a reading specialist in Baltimore County. On behalf of myself and a group of wonderful people committed to making sure every child in Maryland learns to read proficiently, we want to welcome you. We are thrilled that you have joined us to learn about the Reading League. The seeds for the Maryland chapter of the Reading League were planted several years ago when Amy Siracusano, a Calvert County educator, joined the board of directors of the new Reading League and started sharing professional learning opportunities for teachers and administrators. Teachers and parents who attended the Reading League conference in Syracuse, New York, were excited to learn about the state affiliates that were being formed and thought there would be a need or a demand in Maryland. Meanwhile, several Maryland educators discovered the Reading League materials online and also wanted to form a Reading League Maryland chapter. Together, we have assembled a crew of reading educators and supporters with varied backgrounds who are dedicated to making the Reading League Maryland happen. You will meet them after Laura Stort's presentation. We would also like to thank Michelle Murphy for moderating our virtual meeting tonight. We couldn't have had this meeting without her. So why are we here? We are here because every child has the right to learn to read, and every teacher has the right to learn about the science of reading. We're here because the most fundamental responsibility of schools and educators is teaching a child to read. Research shows that at least 95% of students can learn to read proficiently. Yet, in Maryland, 60% of students are not proficient readers. We're here because a student's socioeconomic status or race is not an excuse for poor reading outcomes or instruction. We're here because when equity is a priority, all children receive high quality Tier 1 reading instruction in their general education classrooms. We're here because professional development should be grounded in reading research. We're here because reading instruction and curriculum should be aligned to evidence. We support teachers, administrators, school board members, a community of learners dedicated to sharing and implementing the science of reading. We support all of you who have joined us and your willingness to keep learning so that we can positively impact the lives of Maryland's children together. So before we turn this meeting over to Dr. Laura Stort, we would like to take a little poll to understand your role and your comfort level with the current reading research. So the first poll question that's going to, I think, pop up. Am I right? The first poll question is going to be, what is your role in educating children? Are you a teacher, administrator, parent, or other? Okay, so unfortunately, because I have it kind of split screen, I don't have the results, but we want to welcome all of you regardless. This is kind of to help us know who our audience is and to really fine tune the chapter, and just for all of you joining us, we want to know kind of just our demographics. So we appreciate you. But also just remember that you could also be a parent and a teacher like myself. So you can kind of have two roles or more. Okay, so the second poll question is, how much do you know about the science of reading? And the choices are a lot, some, a little, or nothing. And be assured that wherever you may land on your current understanding, we will do our best to provide meaningful professional development to everyone. So don't worry about where you are in the spectrum. Okay, so thank you all for your help. We appreciate it. So now we will turn it over to Dr. Laura Stort. Dr. Stort is the National Director for the Reading League. She will talk about how the Reading League came to be and give you an introduction to some of the key research findings that form the basis for the science of reading. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Stort.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's just so delightful to be here. I've had a wonderful time working with the organizers in Maryland. I'm tuning in with you tonight from my home outside Chicago, and I'm just really thrilled with how many people have come, devoted parents and educators. I know most of us here tonight are teachers, and it's just my privilege to be speaking with you tonight. And as Jenny said, I'm the National Director of the Reading League, which is a position that I hold very dear. So tonight, what we're going to do is just get to know the Reading League and give a little overview of the science of reading. Now, looking from the poll, it seems like a lot of you know a lot about the science of reading, and many of you know some about the science of reading, so bravo. So hopefully, much of this is going to be really affirming for you tonight as I go through some of the foundations that really drive our work. And of course, this is an invitation to join our future Reading League Maryland chapter. So just, again, lovely to be here. So I've worn a lot of hats. I've been in education for a really long time. And I will say that it's really my greatest passion to really be working in the field of early literacy. And as a matter of fact, I just want to share this with you. I have a mission statement on the wall of my office. And it's that I want to play whatever role I can to ensure that children learn to read joyfully in the primary grades, enabling them to flourish as literate citizens of the 21st century. And I'm guessing that many of you tonight share that mission and share that passion with me, or you wouldn't be doing the work you're doing. You know, we know that teaching children to read is really the greatest challenge we have, but it's the most important work that we can do. It's fundamental to their well-being in their lives. So thank you for the work that you're doing and the passion that you share. So speaking of passion and mission, just to let you know a little bit about the Reading League. The mission of the Reading League is to advance the awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned reading instruction in schools. I'll tell you a little bit more about the work of the Reading League and kind of what we've got brewing right now later in the presentation, but I wanted to share with you a little bit about the origin story. And as Jenny said, we've got Amy Siracusano with us tonight, who is one of the original board members, still a board member of the Reading League, so she can understand this, can share this as well. So the Reading League was essentially started by a group of people in Syracuse, New York, and many of them had studied under Dr. Benita Blackman at Syracuse University. And the group of people that kind of came together were university faculty, public school teachers, speech language, school psychologists, parents, and essentially they kind of came together with this frustration about, you know, knowing the principles of the science of reading, excuse me, and not seeing those principles implemented in their schools. So our founder, Maria Murray, formed the league, and the league started hosting events in Syracuse, local events. You know, hey, let's just bring the science to our local teachers. And I know the first live event they held in Syracuse, they expected they might get, you know, a couple dozen people to show up. And when over hundreds of people started coming to these live events, they thought, maybe we're on to something, right? And that's essentially how the league was formed. And a very generous donation from a benefactor was given to us a couple of years ago now, and that's allowed us to really grow and move into the national stage. I encourage you, we're not going to take the time tonight to watch this, but I encourage you, on our website, there is a video we have called a Roundtable discussion. And this will go a little more deeply into the origin story, and it showcases some of our founding members and just expresses how, as educators and parents, they came together to form this league. And one thing I like to remember is the league really is for everybody, right? It's for all of us. So, so first of all, if you haven't joined us yet, please do. Here's our website. You can get on. It doesn't cost anything to be a member, and we just love to have you join us. All right, again, a little bit more about the Reading League later, but let's talk about the work and what kind of is the foundation that drives our work. So the science of reading, lots of buzz around the science of reading, and I'd like to kind of look at some of the resources that have been in the news in the past year or so that I think have really elevated this discussion around the science of reading. Education Week, in the upper left-hand corner, you see, published a commentary back in March of 2019, which was a really terrific kind of launch into this discussion, especially with educational leaders. Also, Education Week did a wonderful 3-part series called Getting Reading Right. And of course, if you're not familiar with Emily Hanford's audio documentaries on American public media, exceedingly well-researched reporting around the science of reading. Her latest one What the Words Say just dropped last Friday. Encourage you to check those out. So when we think about all this buzz, what is it? How do we define this body of evidence called the science of reading? So I'm going to let you read a quote to yourself, and this is from a white paper that you will receive tomorrow in the follow-up email. So just go ahead and read this to yourself. Okay. So as you were reading that, I'm sure some words or phrases probably really kind of stuck out to you. And again, if you're well versed in the science of reading, this is probably affirming all the things that you know. But I had a lot of people say to me, wow, 40 years. It's been that long. We've had this body of research. Most studied aspect of human learning. Sometimes that's very surprising to people. So when we start this discussion, when we start kind of elevating the discussion on the science of reading, a lot of people who may be new to this might be thinking, wow, there's so much I don't know, so much I wasn't taught in my teacher preparation. And sometimes this seems a little overwhelming, but I want you to remember something, that, we just have unfinished work around literacy. This is taken from the article I shared earlier that was written by the educational leaders. There's no shame, there's no blame. There's an urgency to move forward with this knowledge that we can let the evidence guide us as we strive toward our shared mission of delivering on the promise of literacy for all. And as I said, if you didn't learn this in your teacher prep, do not worry. I mean, I certainly didn't, and this is not uncommon at all. Go ahead and read this to yourself. All of these studies really confirm that many of us were not exposed to the science of reading in our professional preparation. So again, we move forward from here. And I always like to point out too, it's not about working harder. There isn't a person on this webinar tonight that I am sure isn't working as hard as they possibly can, especially as we're looking to launch this highly unusual school year. So it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. And this requires us to know the research, and it requires us to use that research. I always kind of say, let's use this evidence as a litmus test for the choices that we make every day. And sometimes that requires us then to stop what's not working. Oftentimes that's the hardest thing to do, right? We all have materials and practices that have worked for many of our children. We don't want to give those up. I think the key challenge when we think about this evidence base is, what are the highest utility practices, right, with the greatest bang for the buck that reach the largest number of children. And when we adopt those practices, sometimes we have to give up others, which is why bullet point here, number 3, is so critical. We have to support each other in building that knowledge and practice. And that is why the Reading League exists, and that is why chapters exist, to support one another in that knowledge and practice, right? So there's some big ideas I just want to touch on this evening in our time together. The first is that reading is not natural. Instruction really counts. Second is that there is that convergence of evidence, multiple fields of study. And the third is that, the most exciting idea, which is with that research-based instruction, we can teach virtually everyone to read. All right, so let's do a little activity. We're going to start with some kindergartners. Here's 24 darling kindergartners, all eager and ready to go. I know they're not socially distanced, but let's go back in the past, and this is what our kindergartners would look like on their rug. And I want you to think about those kindergartners as really representing what I would call the typical distribution of the population in the attainment of reading as a learned skill. Okay? Right. So given that, think of those 24 students, how many of them will learn to read in a seemingly effortless way, or maybe come to school already reading? And by the way, I mean really reading, accuracy, fluency, comprehension, right? How many will learn to read relatively easily with most any kind of instruction? How many will require code-based, explicit, systematic, sequential instruction? And how many will require that plus additional intensive repetitions. Now, you don't have to put anything in the chat box. This is just a, personal reflection. And try not to think too much about your own classrooms or your own schools. Just kind of think about reading across the general population as a learned skill. All right, so I'm going to just give you a minute to ponder the question, and then we'll look at what the statistics say. All righty, time's up. I know I didn't give you much time to think about that, but let's see what the statistics say. About 1 in a classroom of 24, about 5% of us read almost effortlessly, and perhaps some of you were that student, or you have children who were that student. I think we all know some students like that. About 8 of us learn to read relatively easily with almost any type of instruction. Okay, hold on here. There we go. So about a third of our kids are going to be fine no matter what. About 50% of us or more sometimes require code-based, explicit, systematic, sequential instruction. And about 2 to 4 of us, or maybe 10%, require all that and more. Right? Now, where does this come from? Well, there's a lot of research kind of around this. One of the best infographics that I like to share with people, if you haven't already seen this, check it out. This is Nancy Young's infographic. She calls it the Ladder of Reading. And I really like this because of really what she's saying that's over to the right-hand side of the infographic, that, all of our kids are advantaged by a structured approach or an explicit, systematic, sequential approach, but it's absolutely critical for most of us. And I go back to Anita Archer. Anita Archer says explicit instruction is good for everybody, critical for some. Why is that? Well, I always go back to Dr. Marianne Wolf. Human beings were never born to read. And by the way, I highly recommend this book. If you haven't already read it, check it out, Read or Come Home. It's about reading in the digital age, really interesting and timely. And Proust and the Squid, her groundbreaking book, is really about the reading brain. But here's what we know. We know that, yes, some children seem to effortlessly begin reading, but the majority of us have to be taught. Reading and writing are recent inventions in this grand scope of humanity. Spoken language has been with us for 100,000 years. It's hardwired inside the human brain. The human brain is adapted to language processing. But the written code hasn't been around long enough for us to have developed a reading brain. And the neural circuitry, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that is necessary in the brain to read is created primarily through instruction, right? And I also like to remember, too, that really relatively very few of the world's languages even has a written component. Only about 10% of the world's 5,000 to 7,000 languages has a written component. So an alphabetic code, a written language that represents speech, is not just part of the human condition, right? As Marianne Wolf has said too, it's an unnatural act. Also, when you think of instruction counts, but early instruction really counts as well. And I like to use this graphic representation here. Oh, sometimes my little thing is just freezing up. Sorry about that. This is from Stanovich's Matthew effect. And the Matthew effect, of course, is the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And it really shows kind of a trajectory of a successful reader versus that of a struggling reader. And the idea is that if we can identify those children early on who may struggle, for example, you kindergarten teachers, I know you know this, if we have children who come to school less prepared in the area of oral language, can we close that gap early before it becomes insurmountable? And Joe Torgeson's research really put some numbers behind this. We know that in kindergarten it could take 15 to 30 minutes a day over a short amount of time to really close that gap. But from third grade up, we're talking 90 minutes to 3 hours a day over a longer period of time. Those of you who work with struggling readers know what that's like. So So the idea is that instruction counts and that early instruction is really important, right? Now, so if we believe all that, if instruction is critical, then let's turn our attention to kind of what that instruction looks like. And again, letting the evidence guide us on this. So we're going to just look at some conceptual models, some theoretical models, which for many of you I know are very familiar. And for some of you, this might be new information. If it is, just kind of let it wash over you and think about areas that you might want to delve deeper into later. And one of the things I can provide for you, I forgot to mention this today, is I could provide you a list of resources which have links to them. So some of the things I'm talking about, I can send you a resource document in your follow-up email. Okay, so again, 40 years, multiple fields of discipline, major research syntheses. Of course, we have the National Reading Panel in 2000, and it's interesting when we look at that because that was a real watershed moment. I know some of you on the call don't remember that because you're very, very young, but I certainly do. It was very influential in my own practice. And as a matter of fact, our next journal, the Reading League's next journal, is going to be the National Reading Panel 20 years later. And we'll be looking at, what do we know now that we didn't know then? But interestingly enough, since that National Reading Panel report, nothing's really refuted the evidence. There's been a lot of corroboration of that evidence. We also have empirical research on reading, and I show you this, not expecting you to be able to read it. It's teeny weeny, I know that. I'm just showing you to illustrate the point that we have dozens of journals which publish empirical studies on literacy, acquisition, and instruction, right? So we've got a really profound research base. Now, sometimes people say to me, oh, Laura, you can make research say whatever you want. But that isn't actually true. If we really understand what makes research valid, what makes high quality research. And to that end, I recommend this wonderful book. You can download it, it's free. Just Google this. It really, for those of us who perhaps didn't have coursework in statistics or research modeling, it clearly explains things like sample sizes, quantitative versus qualitative, effect sizes. Again, it's free, you can download it. Also, on our YouTube channel, Dr. Steve Dykstra has a really wonderful video about, what makes research valid. So I encourage you to check that as well. So again, robust body of knowledge. Let's look at some of those conceptual models. And the first one, of course, is our simple view of reading. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll just review this quite quickly. It was first posited by Goff and Tumner back in 1986. Since then, it's been supported by a strong and very enduring body of knowledge. And it really represents this equation for reading comprehension. Essentially, that reading comprehension is a product of word recognition or decoding and language comprehension or listening comprehension. And simply put, decoding times language, reading comprehension. It's important, though, to note it's not a sum, it's a product. It isn't as simple as we teach kids to decode, then we add on some language, and voila, we're reading. That'd be great, right? But I want to use some numbers to clarify, and we'll keep this simple. 0 is no evidence, and 1 is evidence of. So if a student is unable to decode the text on the page, we would give D a value of 0. However, perhaps that same child has robust language and can comprehend well at that listening level. So LC would have a value of 1. But 0 times 1 is still, that's right, 0. In other words, you can't just bring language or listening comprehension to the table to be a reader. You have to get the text off the page. And conversely, right, you can't just be a decoder. You have to also bring your language comprehension to the table. And of course, all of us as teachers, we know kids we would perhaps, say is a 0.5 in decoding, a 0.5 in language comprehension, equals 0.25, clearly not adequate for true reading comprehension. So the simple view just is really important for us recognizing that both aspects of the language of reading, decoding, and language are equally important in making sense of text, which of course is the goal. I also, though, want to frame this around instructional priorities and just to think about cognitive load. Because when we think about a beginning reader, one of the things that we want to do really, as quickly as possible is get to that point where we have developed the ability to get the text off the page automatically. Because when we're first learning that, almost all of our brain energy is really devoted to that part of the simple view. And there's very little cognitive energy really left to think our way through text or navigate our way through text. However, when we become more automatic in that decoding capability, brain energy allocation can shift, and we can devote more of that energy to navigating our way through text. So that is really one of the reasons we focus a lot on that in beginning. It's not because we don't recognize both parts of the reading equation are equally critical. It's that we want to make sure that in the early years, we're really devoting that instructional priority to getting that text off the page and freeing up that brain energy. So simple view is one of our conceptual models. Another one, of course, is the many strands of skilled reading, or what we call Scarborough's rope. And what I love about this is this breaks down the simple view into essential subskills that make up those components. So when we think about language comprehension, we think about what do we bring to the table, right? You and I, as fluent, competent readers, we bring to the table our background knowledge. We bring our knowledge of words and word meanings. We bring the understanding of language structure, sentences, and syntax. We bring our understanding, we bring our verbal reasoning, especially in the area of inferential comprehension. We bring our literacy knowledge to bear. Then when we think about word recognition, what does this mean? When we think about word recognition, of course, the first thing we think about in terms of subskills is this phonological awareness, or this big umbrella term that encompasses the sound structures of language. And of course, when we think about phonologic awareness, when we break that down into smaller units, eventually we get to that phoneme awareness and subsequent phoneme proficiency, which is understanding and manipulating those discrete sounds of language, which of course those phonemes then are mapped with graphemes or mapped with letters or letter combinations to allow us then to
We lost you. We can't hear you.
All right, you're muted.
Got me? Okay. All right, very
Gotcha.
good. So, yeah, sorry, you know what, I'm pushing my advance button here, and sometimes the mute gets in the way, so I apologize about that. So, phonological awareness, umbrella term, really moves us down into that phoneme awareness, phoneme manipulation, which map to graphemes or map to letters or letter units, allows us to both decode and encode or decode and spell. And of course, our goal here is sight recognition. And sight recognition, sometimes we think of sight words, and many times we think of sight words as those pesky, non-decodable words that we give kids flashcards for. But what we're really talking about here is this idea that as we develop proficiency in mapping phonemes and graphemes, or utilizing the alphabetic code, as we practice that phonic decoding, those words can then be mapped, orthographically mapped, into our brain for automatic retrieval. And that's really what sight recognition is. And as I heard someone say not long ago, all words aspire to be sight words. Again, you and I, as we move across text, we're able to have kind of this instant recall of words because we've orthographically mapped so many words. And once we have proficiency in that, it really accelerates our ability to continue to add words to that automaticity component. I love this model because I think it's elegant. I think it shows the dynamic processes of reading. And when we think about the language comprehension over time, what this wrapping of the strands represents is we become increasingly strategic in how we utilize these language comprehension subskills in making sense of text. The braid represents how we become increasingly automatic over time. And I love what my good friend, Dr. Deb Glazer says about this. She says, think about a braid, right? When you braid something, it's very deliberate, it's methodical, it's sequential, just like teaching those foundational word recognition skills, right? And as we look toward the right side of the rope, we see that skilled reading is represented here in that fluent execution of word recognition and language comprehension. So I love this. I think it's dynamic and lovely, and there's so much to unpack here. And there's some truths, really, that are represented by the rope. One is that all of these can be taught, all of these can be assessed. And the second is that it's the integration. It's the integration of these subskills that really creates that ability to read. Now, how does the simple view overlay this? Again, very beautifully, right? Now, I want to return to, again, that sight recognition piece, because I think that's a piece that all of us are really, separating in our brain, this recognition of sight, sight recognition versus sight words, or what we used to think of as sight words, which were high frequency, non-decodable words. So let's go to David Kilpatrick and go ahead and read this definition of orthographic mapping. So as readers, right, as beginning readers, we move from letter sound knowledge to phonic decoding to orthographic mapping. And none of this is a visual process. And I like to emphasize that, because I know when I came up as a teacher, and I recognize it was a long time ago, but really reading was seen as a visual process. And it really isn't, because every step of reading development requires that phonologic integration, and orthographic mapping is really a natural outcome of effective reading instruction, which emphasizes that phonologic integration in the language hemisphere of the brain. And again, once in place, it really accelerates the acquisition of sight words, or instantly recognizable words. All right, good. So I want to just lay over some more information about this in terms of the neuroscience. Let's look at these fMRI studies, which have yielded so much information that really corroborates much of what we know from these conceptual models. I'm guessing many of you have had experiences perhaps with MRIs. This is an fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance machine. This child will go in, he will read, and in the act of reading, his brain will be imaged. And this is accomplished because that increased neural activity, in this case reading, will cause more oxygenated blood to flow to that area of activity. And the iron in that blood produces a magnetic signal which can be imaged. So it allows us to kind of peek into the brain, during the act of reading. And what these neuroscientific images have shown us is that and this is very simplified, but there are main areas of the brain involved in reading. We have the orthographic processor back here, and this is all the left hemisphere, which is the most effective part of the brain in which to build these neural systems. This is where eventually we will store words through the orthographic mapping process. The phonologic processor, which is the processing of sounds, and the brain imaging studies have shown this neural pathway that allows us to connect that. And this is the neural system that we want to develop so we can quickly and efficiently link letters and sounds in order to both decode and encode, right? And Sally Shaywitz says, essentially within the brain, we're building that neural circuitry. That initial circuitry is a critical first step for developing that reading brain, right? That's the first step. We practice through phonic decoding. We secure that neural system, and that allows us to then orthographically map words. Now, what's interesting about these brain imaging studies is we see a lot of consistency. If you look at Guinevere Eden's work and Nadine Gabb's work, a lot of consistency in these brain studies and images. But we also see some consistency with our struggling readers, and we see typically in our struggling readers, we don't see a lot of well-developed neural networks in the left hemisphere. So we might ask ourselves, what's going on, with some of our struggling readers? And as Sally Shaywitz refers to this, is sometimes our struggling readers are reading on the wrong side of the brain, because oftentimes what we see with a struggling reader is very little brain activation on the left hemisphere, but lots of activation on the right. Why is this happening? Well, sometimes, unfortunately, this has to do with instruction or the way the student was prompted as they were learning to read. When we teach students to guess, when we teach students to memorize words, when we teach students to use context clues to figure out words, we may be inadvertently building reading in the right hemisphere, which is not well suited to reading because it is an area more suited to memorizing visual images, right? So let's go back to some research here. Stanford University, the Stanford researchers used a brain mapping technique to capture brain responses to new word learning, taught through two different approaches. One was a letter sound grapheme phoneme approach or a more phonics-based approach. Another was a more whole word approach, which is, look at the picture, guess at the word. Does it look right? Does it sound right? And taught using these two different approaches, what they found, and you can see this from the back of the skull here, the grapheme phoneme focus yielded increased speed of recall, right, beginning that orthographic mapping, and increased brain activity in the left hemisphere, which is where we want to see that, whereas the whole word focused increased the activity in the right hemisphere. So these researchers, and by the way, oh, sorry, that's my dog. These and I can link you to this particular study if I send you that resource page. What the researchers found is essentially this. Teaching students to sound out at sparks more optimal brain circuitry than instructing them to memorize the word cat, right? So sometimes, however, people will ask me, hey, Laura, children develop in different ways. So don't we need to teach children to read in different ways? So I'm going to give you this to read, which is from Stanislaus Dehaene. Go ahead and read this to yourself. And Stanislaus Dehaene is one of, if not the world's leading authority on the neuroscience of language. And this is, one of his books that I took this from. And this makes a lot of sense to me. Now, however, do some of us learn the alphabetic code in implicit ways without explicit phonics instruction? Yes. I mean, if you think about, the activity we did at the top of the hour, sure, some of us. But I like to remember three things. One, learning to read is not natural. So there aren't a lot of us who learn to read that way. And two, we don't know who those children might be when they come to school. So three, explicit instruction is good for all and absolutely imperative for most of us. Right? Thank you, Stanislaus. All right, now, however, I want to go back to this because it feels like I know that I've been talking just a lot about the word recognition strand, because I want to ground us back in this. The science of reading is not just about the word recognition. It's not just about phonics. We tend to stress this only because this is the area in which we see the most confusion and the greatest disparity in evidence-based instruction, right? But please remember, the science of reading is about all aspects of reading. And the science of reading is for you. It's for all of us. All right, so I know I've spent most of our time on kind of the why, the research, the conceptual models, but I do want to spend a moment just talking about the what, the areas of instruction that make up the major components of reading. Always go back to the National Reading Panel. Again, one of the major syntheses on reading research. So just to ground us in on kind of the what, we've already talked about phonologic and phonemic awareness. And as you saw in that, when we talked about David Kilpatrick's work, the phonemic awareness is just part of that larger umbrella, and it's critical. He talks a lot about it. We don't have time to really go into this tonight, but it's not just phonemic awareness that we raise children's awareness in kindergarten and first grade, but we continue to work at that level to secure that phonologic understanding through phonemic manipulation into what we call phonemic proficiency, right? So I know that when I first came up through the years where we learned about phonemic awareness, it was kind of a kindergarten thing or kindergarten first grade thing. And now we know that we want to continue to secure that phonemic proficiency into the intermediate grades. Obviously, phonics, which of course is not just instruction in letters and sounds or grapheme and phonemes, but includes the structural analysis of words, morphemes and syllable types, as well as spelling. We want, as we're working, to develop our phonic proficiency in reading, we want to utilize that in our writing or spelling as well. Fluency, which of course is reading with accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression. Dr. Jan Hasbrook, who I think is one of our leading authorities in the area of fluency, she always reminds us, though, of those three things: accuracy, rate, and prosody. Accuracy, first, foremost, and forever. Vocabulary is another one of our essential elements, and of course I include morphology here because morphological units are meaningful units of words. Excuse me. And finally, text comprehension. And text comprehension, the understanding of connected text. Text comprehension is an essential element. However, it's also a result of the mastery of those components. The other piece I like to include in this, of course, is writing. Even though this wasn't part of the National Reading Panel research, excuse me, I like to include written comprehension. I use that word deliberately because written comprehension really is all aspects of writing: the handwriting, the tactile component of making print, grammar or understanding sentences, understanding syntax, and of course, composition. So we have research on the why, or the theoretical foundations, the understandings that really drive the work. We also understand the key components, and of course there's also research on characteristics of effective instruction. So I don't want to leave us tonight without talking a little bit about the how. So when we think about characteristics of effective instruction, obviously evidence-based, which we've talked a lot about, we've unpacked that a little bit tonight, early and intentional. And I use that word intentionally to support that idea that instruction is well-planned and purposeful rather than opportunistic or haphazard. Early also, I want to emphasize that the early implies a real strong focus on Tier 1 instruction, because we do know with evidence-based, effectively delivered Tier 1 instruction, we should be able to teach 85% or more of our children, right? And that effective instruction includes an explicit, systematic, cumulative approach. I do, we do, you do. A system of less complex to more complex elements presented in a cumulative fashion with lots of recursive review. Applied, by that I simply mean that as we're teaching the foundational skills, for example, we are constantly applying them in real reading and real writing. We don't want to just have a phonemic awareness program over here and a phonics program over here, and then we read here, and none of it's connected. Again, think of the rope. Think of the braiding and the wrapping of the rope. It's critical that all those pieces come together and that they're applied in reading or writing. And of course, finally, engaging. And I always bring that up because, those of you who are teachers, you know your kids, you know how to engage your children. I oftentimes get a pushback, though, around sometimes, teaching in an explicit, systematic way. If people have said to me, well, isn't that just skill and drill? Is that just going to, kind of stifle children's love of reading to teach them these foundational skills? I like to remember, however, that children love to play with language. They love to unlock the mysteries of words and the mysteries of writing. So I think that explicit instruction really helps to reveal those mysteries to them. And remember, too, it's a runway to comprehension. It doesn't inhibit comprehension. It's a runway to comprehension. And, the last thing I like to remember, you can't love what you can't do. Right? So we love to be a reader because it's something we can do, something we're good at. All right, so those are kind of our big ideas that I wanted to just share with you tonight to help you understand what drives us, our work at the Reading League. And I do want us to just end on this idea that we can deliver on the promise of literacy for all. And I'll let you read this from from many of us, our hero, Louisa Moats. We really can teach at least 95% of our children to read with accuracy, understanding, and joy. And I know that's the promise that we all want to deliver on, right? And again, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter, knowing the research, stopping what's not working, and really supporting each other. Because the truth is, there's no blame, there's no shame. We just have unfinished work around literacy. So a couple things about us. I wanted to share with you a little bit more about the Reading League. And one thing, you will get this tomorrow, this white paper that I authored, and this is where that initial definition came from. That's a good place to start. And of course, just joining the Reading League is a great place to start. I put our website up here. Check us out. A few things that I want to point out that we're up to these days. Our annual conference is going virtual this year. October 27th, and you can check it out on our website under our events drop-down conference. We have got a terrific lineup for you. We have two wonderful live keynotes. The first one is Clark Janelle Setti talking about dyslexia is no easy foe. And we also have Pamela Snow talking about the public health imperative driving effective beginning early reading instruction. Then we have 18 fantastic breakouts. Anita Archer, Wiley Blevins is going to be talking about decodable text. Suzanne Carricker will be talking about grammar. Steve Dykstra, I mentioned him earlier. His talk is the dirty dozen or so mistakes and misunderstandings that plague our efforts. There you go, Steve. We have Nancy Hennessy talking about comprehension. We have our wonderful David Kilpatrick. William Van Cleve, many of you probably know his work. Julie Washington, and we also have Natalie Wexler talking about the knowledge gap. So lots to offer there. I'm so excited about what's happening. I mentioned the journal. I really think, honestly, I think our journal is a one-of-a-kind journal because it really connects research to practice. Our inaugural journal was in January, which was about the science of reading. The May journal was about the simple view, and in September, we'll be revisiting the National Reading Panel. We offer live and live-streamed events, obviously now live-streamed. Check out our website for more information. Deb Glazer, as I mentioned earlier, she did a terrific live-stream event for us recently on morphines. We have professional development that we offer. We have a wonderful new offering, Online Academy, which takes many of these concepts that we just, overviewed, we just breezed through tonight, and really deepens our understanding and our connection to practice. So check out our Online Academy. We have a knowledge base. We have resources in our knowledge base webpage, which is numerous resources. We also have a YouTube channel with literally dozens of great videos that you can watch. And they make great little, viewing parties. And of course, chapter formation, which is why we're all gathered here tonight. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be a chapter as we investigate this for Maryland? Well, first of all, a chapter, much like the national organization, is designed to be a grassroots organization serving a state or a local region. It's really designed to think about, how do you bring that mission of the Reading League on a more local level? So the chapter has an affiliation with a well-respected national organization, and you align yourself with the mission of the Reading League. From that connection to the Reading League, your chapter would gain visibility and exposure and marketing to increase the advocacy of your own mission. So as you think about Reading League Maryland and the mission that you're going to carve out for yourselves, we will help you elevate that mission. We also, as your national organization, allow you as chapter members access to information and materials that we develop. So there's many advantages to forming a state chapter. How is it formed? Well, you already have a team here that's been kind of working through this. A chapter is formed through an application process, and part of the application process is ensuring that you have a base of members. So many of you who joined here tonight, I hope, are here because you want to become that initial base of membership for Reading League Maryland. Part of the paperwork is incorporating as a tax-exempt entity. The chapters have their own officers, have their own bylaws, and they file financial reports and documentation, right? What does a chapter do? A chapter offers events and activities that are aligned with the purpose and the mission of the Reading League. And I will give you some examples. Our Wisconsin chapter just last week offered 3 90-minute webinars around the science of reading. They offered it free to their Wisconsin constituents. And because their goal, their mission in the state of Wisconsin is to continue to proliferate the understanding of the science of reading throughout the state. Other state chapters have done, for example, book studies. Also, many chapters do things like Facebook Live events. Pretty much everything's turned virtual now, but this is where you can, kind of carve out what do you think is most important that your chapter do. A chapter also needs to seek some funding in order for them to have an operating budget, and that funding can be through donations, it can be through membership dues, it can be through sponsorships. And the chapter does pay a yearly fee to the Reading League, which just helps us maintain chapter websites and maintain our shared drive for chapters. That we have an exception to year 1 because that's a chapter's startup year. All right, so that's just some basics about the Reading League and chapters. So before I turn it over to your organizers for the next steps, I just want to thank you on behalf of my colleagues at the Reading League, staff members and board members, Amy. We really appreciate your dedication and all the work that you do. Please, again, follow us, become a member, follow us on social media, check out our YouTube channel. We've got lots to offer. And then I just want to personally thank you for joining us. As I said at the top, it's my privilege to be able to join meetings like this and share this information with you. I sincerely wish you the best as you start the school year. I know it's a year like no others. And we are here to support you in your work. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. If you want additional information, I'm more than happy to help. So with that, I turn it back over to our leadership team.
Thank you so much. I am sure I speak for everyone when I say that that was an amazing presentation. I'm sure it solidified our reasons for choosing to be here tonight. And also, I don't know about anyone else, but that's my version of teacher self-care. Instead of meditation or anything else, this is how I take care of myself as an educator, is like, adding to my store of knowledge. So thank you so much for that. That was amazing. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to the other members on the planning committee. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say your first name, and then if you just want to unmute and tell us about yourself. So the first person is Sherry.
Hi, I'm Sherry Klink, and I'm an ESOL teacher in Montgomery County.
And then we have Rachel.
I'm Rachel Donnelly. I'm a school psychologist in Anne Arundel County.
And Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Green. I'm the coordinator for English Language Arts pre-K to 12 at MSDE.
And we have Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Murphy. I'm the coordinator of graduate studies in reading at Goucher College.
And Carlene.
Hi, I'm Carlene Spitolnik, and I'm a parent and advocate in the state.
And Susan. And she's here.
There we go. Hi there, I'm Susan Wright. I am a special educator in Howard County.
And Jeannie.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Salm. I'm a parent that's always interested in learning about the science of reading.
And we have Terry.
Unmuted. Can you hear me now? Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here tonight. I just retired from Baltimore County and now am a letters trainer and a Wilson trainer. So glad you came to be with us this evening.
And then we have Laura.
Hello, everyone. I'm one of the co-founders of Decoding Dyslexia Maryland. I'm a parent of a daughter now in college with dyslexia. Welcome, everybody.
And finally, we have Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Siracusano. I am a literacy specialist in Calvert County Public Schools. a letters trainer, and as Jenny and Laura both shared earlier, I'm on a board member of the National Reading League in Syracuse, and I'll be an advisory board member for us here in Maryland. So I'm so happy to see so many of us here, and thank you to the organizing team. You've done an amazing job.
Thank you. So the next step will be working on forming the Maryland nonprofit. And once we have that in place, we would like to start providing programming and events related to the science of reading and in support of the teachers in Maryland. We do have some open positions on our board of directors, and we're trying to get a diverse group of board members. Diversity is a priority, so we're happy to take nominations, and you can do that through TRL for MD at gmail.com. So it's TRLFORMD at gmail.com. And we have one more poll, so don't leave yet. This time we would like to know what kind of events you would like the Reading League to host. I think I can figure out how to do this now. There we go. So would you be interested in, and you can select all that apply, professional learning workshops on reading, book studies, peer discussion groups, information about current Maryland law regarding screening and instruction, sharing examples of best practices for reading across school districts. And then also, if there are specific topics that you would like to learn about or speakers you would like to have us host, please just let us know your preference in the chat box. So in closing, we would just like to thank you so much. Thank all of you for taking this time out of your busy schedules to join us. We have just a couple action items for you. If you could fill out our membership form to join as a founding member of the Reading League Maryland, that could be your something you can really share at cocktail parties, that you are the founding member. And then the link to the form is in the chat box. And then also tomorrow, you're going to receive your follow-up email with Dr. Lars Stewart's amazing presentation, a link to the membership form, and we invite you to share the email and the membership form with friends and colleagues. Everyone is welcome. So once again, thank you. And as Dr. Maya Angelou famously stated, remember, we do the best we can until we know better. And when we know better, we do better. So let's go out there and do better. So thank you so much.